Abolition is about presence, not absence. It's about building life-affirming institutions. How can we build life-affirming movement spaces where people come and know all of me, including my flaws, has room to be here? If I cause harm, I will be held accountable, but I will not be thrown away. I won't be torn apart. I won't be destroyed. I won't be disrespected even. I see so much disrespect of people's fundamental humanity under the guise of accountability culture. That is a quote from Adrienne Marie Brown.
I think it's really beautifully said as well in terms of this is a point I've seen. I actually makes me think about, I don't know the exact quote, so I won't even bother quote it, but I'm just going to hat tip HT to Africa Brooke, who said much the same thing, that like, as we cancel people, we're essentially canceling ourselves. We're depriving ourselves of people or perspectives that provoke in us a strong response, which, you know, again, in my druthers is always, oh, if there's a strong response, we have something to learn there. I think culturally we've reached this internal sensitivity point where anything that causes people to feel bad feelings, for some people, immediately equals kill it with fire. You know what I mean? And we can't, I think hence cancel culture as like in large, like I think we're going to zoom out more in today's conversation, is quite often quite harmful, because it seeks really to outcast, to destroy, to harm, to punish, as opposed to learn. And again, if a large group is provoked, this is kind of interesting thing, right? A large group is provoked. That is not immediately verification that that person has committed some sort of cultural transgression. It well may mean the culture has a flipping primal wound that person addressed. And if we're all triggered about it, we all have something that's true about, you know what I mean? I often think people really in general don't get super provoked about things that are just completely and abjectly wrong. There's usually something about it that you're like, I don't like that thing about it, or I don't like what it says about me quite often. You know what I mean? We're often seeking to like castigate, and I do this in my own life too, like castigate that which we castigate in ourselves, which can be born about from a rational, like substantial premise, or from spurious things like majority rule. You know what I mean? Majority rule is never really going to, in and of itself, grant us, truth, anything approaching truth. It'll just be consensus, and then, that sort of thing. So they're like, oh, so you hate democracy, Brendan? By the way, my name's Brendan.
My name's Andy. Hello.
And this is totally classic. And we are addressing the question once more, is cancel culture just accountability? And that pause is intentional because, as Andy highlighted last week, I didn't mean it. I think I wrote the question, but I didn't mean it to be that profound. I was like, is it merely is all I meant. But when just, since just has two meanings, the more impactful meaning justice, actually highlights, as Andy noted, the greater imperative of what we're talking about. Because there are things, we have to admit, I guess we didn't really talk too much about it, there are things that do need to be canceled. There are aspects of ourselves that you need to excise, that need to be removed. But addressing those and deciding which those are, of course, is the human project.
Yeah, and there are ways that in the context of movement spaces or social justice at large, I think what a lot of us are attempting to address are the ways in which people are already being canceled, based on being marginalized. So that there's dominant culture in the middle and sort of towards the nexus of power, and then everything on the margins has a tendency to be canceled. whether it's by law or by harm or violence or words or actions or other measures.
Yeah. And that's the thing too, identifying, this is the helpful aspect of cancel culture, is even rising up against something or starting to talk about something is helpful to identify constantly. Like we talked about last week, like, oh, the oops, ouch, oops. Like if there's an ouch, then okay, let's stop for a second. Let's figure out what happened. Did something happen? You know what I mean? And or did nothing happen? Which is these are all on the plate. You know what I mean? Or did something sort of happen? Like and likewise with sort of the concepts of oppression and oppressor, like we have to constantly ascertain, like, did that happen, or and how did this outcome happen, and is the outcome being actively pursued, or are we living in the outcome of previous active pursuit, and now we accept non-remedy of previous pursuit as baseline? And I mean, all of these things are interwoven, and we have to realize, just like that same exploration that you're involved in, the same thing happens with any like knee-jerk cancel culture response to, to whatever Dave Chappelle's jokes or whatever. I just bring him up because I know we record these, as I've been saying to people, I was like, we record them after things, but we release them later, which I think has pragmatic help. So it's like a hot take served cold. But just this week, when we're recording this, Dave Chappelle was just attacked on stage by a man with a gun knife, by the way, which I just think is such a weird part of the story. It was like a fake gun, but the fake gun was a real knife.
Not like a bayonet.
No, like it looks like a gun, but it's actually a knife. Okay. All right. I don't know. Like literally for some reason that was the most brain melting part of it. But no, but like whatever. That's
so he didn't like that phrase, don't bring a knife to a gunfight.
Right. He brought a gun knife to a not, it wasn't even a fight. It was comedy, but whatever. But like, I think those are like popular examples of what we consider cancel culture.
Comedy always a fight? Isn't that why you like it?
I mean, that is, yeah, it is. It is. That's literally what it's there to do. It's basically for us to, it's like tickle. It's a comedy, stand-up comedy is a tickle fight. Yeah. But yes, it should. I mean, no, I don't think there's any really good comedy that doesn't combat something. It has to violate some accepted premise, whether that's reality, how you talk about people, or else it's not funny, because then there's no surprise. So yes, it is intentionally violated.
Well, I didn't hear about Chappelle being attacked by the gun knife, but certainly I'm reminded by him. I mean, all the controversy around him making certain jokes,
yeah, that
are perceived as anti-trans or transphobic, and then him defending that by saying, "Well, I have a trans friend who thinks it's hilarious," and yeah, that's a question I hold. Like there. One way to look at that is that he's attempting to draw us into this future where trans, particularly Black trans folks, aren't dying every day at alarming rates, and aren't walking in those deeply, I think, harmed bodies and trauma, so that perhaps there's this sort of equal, I think I mentioned South Park before, like the equal opportunity offender kind of version of things, or it's like,
yeah,
hey, everything's fair game. And wouldn't we want to live in a world where everybody could be treated similarly, or we're not going to make exceptions because we have actually done the work to reduce the harm of that population.
Yeah. Well, and mockery, I mean, of course, I come from a comic perspective. Mockery is actually one of the signposts of equality. You know what I mean? So it's a weird thing. Like if you can't do it, then that's actually unequal. It literally is unequal. You know what I mean? So then it's fascinating. So like, but it's like, oh, are you, again, this is the kind of the punching down concept, which I think a lot of people get canceled for. Punching down on whoever, right? Is the concept. And in some ways, your phrasing of the retort is not entirely, his retort wasn't entirely incorrect, but like the idea of, oh, I have somebody who was not offended, is similar to like, well, okay, I threw fireworks in the room, let's say, and one person didn't have a heart attack or whatever. You know what I mean? 3 people had a heart attack and one person didn't. You know what I mean? Now that's a good. Now, of course, this is the hard part with comedy, or the whole cancel culture we talked about. Not yesterday, but last week was identifying like in one of these things, like, oh, she's being canceled for what? Harm is often the barometer, and I think it's what we talked about, I think rightly, last week. But then it's demonstrating harm, like identifying harm. You know what I mean? And this is the thing we've seen where like quote unquote cancel culture is. I'm just going to say has nothing to do with accountability. This aspect of it, where it's people who aren't harmed, and people who are often harmed, like imagining harm on somebody else's behalf, which from a fundamental standpoint is about love for your neighbor. So heck yeah. But it is also in some ways about condescending love for your neighbor, because assuming that such a thing as words would hurt your neighbor if they haven't even said so. So that's the thing of like, the thing you talked about last week, which I thought was great, the ouch, oops. That's literally someone else in the group saying ouch on someone's behalf. You know what I mean? So someone says something and then Christina goes, ouch. I mean, Tabitha you can't talk about that around Tabitha. And you're like, ooh, I get it. Like, again, I can kind of get your vibe of like, but your ouch is about somebody else, which is weird, especially in improv. Let me just relate this to comedy. In improv, it's kind of like bad. It's bad vibes. It's kind of a bad choice to talk about someone who's not in the scene. It's not, doing Waiting for Godot is high art. Let's be honest. So talking, you're like, when you're in a scene, you're starting a scene with somebody else, you start talking about someone else immediately in any class event, and they'd be like, stop. What do you do? Why? How does that help us? You're literally talking about someone who's not here. You're here. They're here. Talk to each other. You have everything you need in the scene, in the eyes of your partner. And I think a lot of the work you're up to honestly sounds similar to that. And like, you're harmed. I'm the person who may have harmed you. I'm going to address it directly with you. And we can collectively hold space and even offer all sorts of angles of a viewpoint to help suss out what's reality, because we're both locked in our little Rashomon, this is real, this is not real, this whatever system. But it's about the person and the person. And I think that's certainly one area where someone can have a good intention and cause only harm.
That's fascinating. The intention, as I understand it and use that framework, is like I would only ever speak for myself. Like, that's a really slippery slope of being like, oh, wait a minute. Especially, and I know I've been guilty of this, of the kind of newer social justice warrior, white folks. Many of us emerge after these major events like George Floyd, and for me it was Ferguson and Michael Brown, and there's a tendency to be like, I'm one of the good ones. That's just who doesn't want to be on the right side of well, I guess there's plenty of people, but I don't know. I think a lot of our investigation is, well, what is the right side of history? What is the right side of these things? Because guess what? They're really nuanced.
You're saying that just to make me angry. Wait, maybe, if we ever make this show a high technology, this would be like when Pee-wee's like the word of the day, when everyone says apple, everyone go bananas. When everyone says nuance, I'm like, I get a twitch in my left eye. Kind of like when people are saying it less. I'm so happy about it. It is what it is. I'm like, I love words and all, but oh my gosh, is that a waste of words? Why did you
of course.
Apples are apples, man. True, bro. It's like deep stoner wisdom, and people say it like it's some sort of Confucian profundity. But yes, I'm opposed to nuance just because I don't think nuance exists, because I don't think gray areas exist. I think they're all black and white binaries. We just haven't zoomed in close enough on, is what Andy was provoking me about. But yeah, sorry, speak of your nuance. Oh, it's like moist.
I've been learning a lot about the importance of embodying sexuality and sexual pleasure this week. So moist. I'm not sure they said the word moist, but that's what it brought up for me. So perfect segue, because one thing we didn't hit on, I was discussing this with another friend and colleague, and I said, oh, we're talking about cancel culture. And his first reaction was, oh, we're talking about intention versus impact. And I don't know if he said versus, which is an important.
Oh, interesting.
But I'll just. But that's how I often say it, but I'm trying to actually remove that or shift that.
Mm-hmm.
And it relates to something you just said, which is this binary. And that
Yeah.
maybe as we continue to just, for anybody interested in this journey between us, just point out our the differences between us and our
Yeah.
personalities and how we see the world. And I believe in the gray area. I
Yeah.
live in the gray area. And the space between, that's a whole theme in one of the groups I'm leading this year.
Yeah.
And in that way, it's often framed like intention and impact are this binary. You have to pick.
Yes.
And the argument often is, well, we live in a world where intention is the thing we usually focus on, particularly if there are power dynamics,
Oh,
because
interesting.
if one person has more power, or if another group has been conditioned to like take care of that group with more power, that person, there can be a tendency to, even though harm may have been done and that person, feels bad at a minimum, or there's some deeper trauma being triggered,
Yeah.
that really could have tangible impact on them in terms of the rest of the day, how they show up, how they can function, do their work, show up for their family, all those things.
Yeah.
Not to mention if they don't really have an opportunity to let that process in any time, in any timely way, that it could be kind of shoved down in the body and perhaps fester and manifest as some sickness later on. But it is the yes and. It is the, well, why does it have to be either? So I, at this point in my journey, feel like we ought to put impact first. Let's look at that. And I think that's a lot of what these discussions are about between us. We see impact differently. We measure it differently. We're studying different bodies of evidence, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
Even the way we think about evidence is quite different. But that's all about impact ultimately. And then the intention, and I'm wondering if this is even some of the ways you hold like even emotional responses, kind of what was the maybe validity or the intention of that emotional response, which I hold differently. I just feel like, well, hey, you know what, emotions, they are what they are, Brendan. I don't know.
Emotions are emotions, bro. Yeah.
And you got to feel what you're going to feel.
Yeah. I'm telling you, man, zoom in. Emotions are a whole bunch of things. Yeah.
So to me, it's like, let's look at impact and let's not throw out intention.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, I totally agree. Well, this is the funny thing. Impact can determine the thing I'm constantly interested in, which is appraisal of intention. So if someone's intention, for example, is constantly A, and they're like, I'm doing A to produce B, and C keeps getting produced no matter how many times they do it, at some point, you can say, okay, you just won't give up. You've got the can-do attitude. You can say you're literally insane. You're the screenwriter's definition of insanity, which is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. Or you are like, you just off your mark. You know what I mean? Oh, you almost got it. You know what I mean? There's so many different ways, whatever. I can go on and on. There's many different things you could assume, but intention is, this is why I agree with you though, that impact is very helpful for determining the accuracy of what intention is. Because intention is very, again, just like emotional response, it's very difficult to prove. So all we have is the information we're able to like discover, right? And then you can kind of rely on first person testimony, but we know that's only reliable to a particular percentage, to a particular degree. We don't always, and especially in the stuff we're talking about in terms of like what cancel culture usually comes to cancel, which I think is fascinating, by the way, that cancel culture doesn't focus on things like that are much more easy to understand. That blows my mind. Like, for example, just this week, I know this by the time it's come out, it'll be different, but this week, the WHO, the World Health Organization, yes, the dubious organization, but whatever, released a report on the pandemic, first 2 years of the pandemic, 5.4 million estimated deaths with COVID, right? That's just like a hard statistical reality. Those people died and COVID was somehow involved. We don't know if COVID killed them or COVID was just there, but we know COVID was involved with the deaths of 5.4 million people in the tabulation of excess deaths from 20 to 22. That's just math, man. You know what I mean? And that, of course, I'm already speaking to subtleties of it, but it's like, oh, that's nice. That's solid. But they mentioned there were 10 million other excess deaths during this pandemic period, not related to COVID. Now, depending on the headline, many headlines are like 15 million people have died because of the pandemic. That's objectively false. We know the pandemic means a virus. Literally, pandemic means a virus that is spread out over the whole world, right? That virus was involved with 5 million, 5.4, but 5 million of those deaths. 10 million, well, what in the world happened there? My best understanding, like just the easy knee jerk before, we don't have to dig into it on this episode, but I just think this is a good example. 10 million then of those deaths are not COVID related. Most tenably, and we've seen this throughout many studies to show a lot of the bulk of this, that is from people responding to COVID. I would say most dominantly, because this was not really a people by the people led response. This was a government led response. So this is due to government response to COVID. Twice as many people, 10 million people died versus 5 million of COVID. So the more dangerous thing this past 2 years, what definably to human life was what governments did, not COVID, right? So that's powerful and very important to understand. We've seen this throughout. This is not a surprise. What's a surprise is people keep reporting it falsely, and I think that's so weird because it's all right there, right? Now, I didn't know who tabulated all that sort of stuff, but we have a definable thing where, oh gosh, that to me is like such an easy harm, like in what's the word? Intent, and what's the opposite one? The way you phrased it?
Impact.
Impact. That's like a negative impact, right? So then you can go, okay, let's cancel all the governments, right? For example, let's cancel every government that was especially egregious in this area. And you can track that back to intention, that if the intention really was to protect us from the 5 million deaths, and yet it killed 10 million, you do have to at least very seriously question, was that intention real? Is that really the intention? Because the harm is so outsized as compared to, that's literally like, I was trying to save these 2 people from the car wreck and you killed 3 people of the 4 in the car wreck while taking them out of the car. You'd have to be like, and it wasn't, they did the autopsy and everything. No, it was the way you took them out. You killed 3 of them. So were you really trying? Maybe you were just freaked out and you panicked or whatever, but you have to go, I don't know. I can't assume your first person intention of trying to protect people was legitimate. But anyway, no one cancels that, which I think is fascinating, right? Because it's like, I don't know. And is it the obviousness of it? Is the fact that people, and this is, I'll hand it back to you, but like, this is part of my adjudication of what cancel culture is about. It's about people acting as judge, jury, executioner, and even in some ways acting as like independent godlike figures, like Mount Olympus, Zeusian figures, where they get to adjudicate in the areas that may appear gray. So when things are much closer to black and white, like this is impactful in a horrendously harmful way, that people are way more like, okay, because there's really nothing to be said about it. You know what I mean? You're like, oh yeah, that was terrible. I'm not needed here. My godlike powers of adjudication are not needed here. But in anywhere that's like seems confusing, people are like, hold on, I'm gonna save the day here.
Yeah, and I'm drawn back to how we started today with that quote about life affirming. And
yeah,
gosh, there are a few things coming up. One is just the nature of intention. Everything I've learned about our psyche and the subconscious, and how many, arguably the majority of our behaviors are really these subconscious programs that are running, these little like subroutines.
Yeah.
So I don't want to like let us off the hook, but what are we talking about? Is it conscious intention, which is, I can state this, and that's actually a very good practice I've learned in accountability culture. It's almost like in pool, like calling the last shot, being like, I mean, I'm the king of like slop shots in pool where
Yeah.
it made it in somewhere, but I did not intend that whatsoever.
Yeah.
And I like playing slop just because it's more fun for me. but
Yes.
you know, in the big leagues, they don't do that because it's like, no. You have to clearly state the intention in order for that to count.
Yeah.
And then, yeah, and the other piece, just going back to the quote about being life affirming, you know, what are, and it's, gosh, it's I mean, obviously, there's so many different opinions about, well, what is the intention behind this, and there's a number of I can't remember if we've developed agreed upon language for this, but let's say conspiracy theories about the intentions of any number of groups or governments or whatever
Yes.
behind
Yes.
this, or in the vaccines and all this. And but what I'm more interested in, I think right now, is based on that data, which seemed clear. Now we have an opportunity to demonstrate the intention in a way. If the intention was truly life affirming and death reducing,
Yeah. Yeah.
are we now behaving in a way that where we're going to learn from that and look at that squarely, or are we going to basically stay in the trough of this narrative that I think has guided a lot of how governments have responded and how we've, you know, because it almost feels like we grabbed onto a few ideas maybe early on, and we were afraid to adjust those. Like there was this fear that, like, well, we need to seem stable. We need to seem like we're in control. We need to, you know, that's what's going to make people feel, you know, confident. And I'm like, I don't think people, I mean, government trust is like at an all-time low. Well, I don't know if it's all time, but it's very, very low.
Yeah. Well, it is. Yeah, that is interesting in terms of, of heeding intention as stated, as opposed to, I think okay, no, here, at least let me stop trying to talk my way into it. Provocatively responding simply to what you said, my general assumption, just to speak to my own point of view and mind, is to not assume intention. I try not to assume intention as to why something is true. Even if someone says something, I'm not immediately going to be like, oh, well, that was their intention then. You know what I mean? I think obviously I've come from like a writing, creating art background, and the author's intention in writing their book is not critically, as a reader, it's not that important. And actually, most of the time, throughout most of the training that I've ever received as an artist, they're like, your intention is great. That's good for you. That's good for you. That is, once your thing's out there, I mean, there's a case to be made. You shouldn't even tell people what your intention is. Like, just how do they absorb it? And you also don't have to defend it. I think he had just very bad intentions with this. Cool. I think he was trying to heal the world. Cool. You know what I mean? People can engage if they want, but ultimately but I'm saying all that in terms of like my training. So that certainly those are some of my subroutines. So then I don't assume people have good intentions. And then I try not to assume likewise that people have bad intentions. Although if I had to pick and someone had a gun to my head, I'd 60-40 selfish intentions versus magnanimous intentions, is just based on my view of human nature. But in general, I'm just like, I don't know. So then to me, I'm just like, let's start with the crime. Let's start with the crime, work backward through the evidence and then maybe figure out motive. I was like, I don't even really care about motive. You know what I mean? But to some people, but I fully say all that, recognizing I am the opposite of many people I've spoken to, where they constantly, like, since this big harm has happened, they're like, yeah, but why? What are you saying? It was intentional? That, like, why would anyone do that? They're constantly asking that. And I'm like, to me, that is in the realm of pure conjecture. Like, that's fun to do, but that's what a conspiracy theory is. Trying to figure out the why. I don't know the why. I knew they did a harmful thing. If they did a drastically harmful thing, my safest intention is that they did what they intended to do. Like, for example, go back to Dave Chappelle. If Dave Chappelle pissed off a bunch of people, actually, I'm pretty sure that's what he intended to do. And that's a completely legitimate, especially with what he's up to. That's literally his job. It's to surprise people and shock people. He does it on purpose. That's what most of his punchlines are. And even if he hasn't shocked the part of the audience in the setup, he's going to find a way to tweak it at the end to where you're like, oh, geez, oh, okay. You know, he's literally there to try to like get you uncomfortable, make you uncomfortable. That's his job, man. So people are like, that really hurt. Be like, okay. I mean, that's like getting mad at a fighter for punching your favorite fighter in the face and you felt the pain. You're like, yeah, he's there to punch people in the face, man. That's the gig, you know? And same with art too. You know what I mean? I did the sketch once. It didn't make it on the album, but where it was like a Chuck Palahniuk style author who was doing a public reading. And then someone in the crowd kept standing up and interrupting and screaming at him, "Stop touching me. Stop touching me. That is, you're violating my space. You stop touching me," because the work he was reading was emotionally moving them and they didn't like that. And I was like, that's, you know, again, I come from that standpoint of like provocation of one another is pretty much, you know, is largely what at least I'm here for, what I think a lot of us are really here for. Again, like you talked about before we started recording, intentionally or unintentionally though, the chosen teacher, what is it? A chosen teacher or whatever, a spontaneous teacher, an unchosen teacher, you know, which you can't accuse Dave Chappelle of because you have to literally buy Netflix, press play, not press pause. You know what I mean? You can stop him at any time. Same thing with Twitter. This is, you know, we talked about this writ large, unfollow, delete the app. Done. Literally, they can't harm you anymore. You know what I mean? It's not, this is the weird thing about harm in terms of like narrative harm, and which I do think narratives can be harmful. So I'm not invalidating that. But like, this is like, oh, when someone says a thing that makes me feel a way, that is harm. And I just think, of course, as an evidentiary individual, I think that part is like super scary. That part frightens me as to how we could somehow arrange a society based on that. You know what I mean? Based on mere perception of harm, not evidence of harm. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And I think well, I actually looked up this quote because I couldn't remember it exactly, but art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable.
Yeah.
Agree or disagree?
Comfort the disturbed. I mean, it's probably the disturb. I mean, I'm much more. You can just go ahead and disturb everybody. But but I think that's what great comedy does. I think that great art does is it's got to take you through both of those elements. And then it can just, this is the thing about art. Art kind of has an end. It can be ended by you walking away from the painting or finishing reading the poem, or it could be manufactured by the person creating it, if it's a story or a play or a movie or whatever, stand-up special. The artist decides the final note, which means the last note may be comforting. The last note may be intended to comfort all, which is kind of a prevalent thing. It kind of leave on a laugh that everyone can enjoy. Or it can leave very intentionally on I'm disturbing as many people as possible note. The quote's provocative too, though, because I was just talking about this morning. We live in a nation generally, like our country is profoundly comfortable. Like the poorest, most destitute people in the United States of America are so resource rich as compared to the destitute in many other countries. So I do think culturally, this is why I think the United States of America is like the capital of cancel culture, because we are phenomenally comfortable. And I think we live in fear of that comfort being taken away from us. Cause I think most people kind of live with some degree of fear of privation, you know, even when they're in a good place.
Yeah.
Or maybe especially when they're in a good place.
I agree with that, and at least through an environmental lens.
Yeah.
Just something measurable. The impact,
the
impact of our comfort in America is quite measurable.
Yeah,
and we tend to offload that to the other parts of the world. I mean, we're killing ourselves too, so I guess there's that. But
yeah, you do it to yourself. You do.
It's not like microplastics in the ocean aren't affecting us and all the other things.
I know they're in our bloodstream now, man. It's crazy. I mean, I don't know if yours are mine, but they are in human beings' bloodstreams now.
I'm just waiting for the mutant powers. I mean, that was when they were like, "There's nanobots in the vaccine." I'm like, then give me a double dose.
I know. Wait, you're saying I'm about to be a cybernetic being? I didn't really enjoy Vin Diesel's adaptation of Bloodshot, as that was called, but that's pretty much his whole thing. Like he had nanobots in his blood that could like heal him, eventually kind of make him lose his entire structure and reform. I mean, yeah.
So I wanted to loop a couple of quick loop backs.
Yeah.
There's something you were saying about you would never. Well, it sounded like you don't care that much about intention generally, which is a pretty neutral position. In a lot of the spaces that are in the network and the networks that I'm part of, these intimate dialogue spaces, these healing spaces, a lot of what makes those work well are agreements. Like, okay, we're gonna all look at this way of being together in this space.
Yeah.
And there's some consistency, but there's a lot of variation, dare I say, to avoid the word nuance.
Thank you. You mean variation from space to space?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just in terms of how they operate, but there's certainly some consistent themes. But one of them that's somewhat lightly controversial is that some spaces will say assume good intent.
Yeah.
And that is an agreement for being in this space, that you assume that everybody here. And I think what that means is, it's interesting. I almost feel like my interpretation of that is not necessarily what I would consider good intent, but at least not intending to harm you with my words.
Yeah. Or even like, honestly, once you introduce the word good, it's so difficult. And then you have to assume, if I read that, again, I'm both a literalist and I love words. I was like, my difficulty with that immediately, not difficulty. Well, my difficulty is then I would have to bring it to someone who came up with it and be like, again, what was your intention? Tell me your intention for this word. What do you mean by good? How do you define good? And then why? why assume good intention? And then do you mean that from my assumption, if I didn't ask and just avoided that conversation, which I might do, I think a lot of people might do, is, I assume they mean that from a relativistic point of view, meaning whatever you define it for you, like an art thing, it's good. Whatever you think of is good. Now that's super harmful, because if someone comes in and they're like, what I consider good, and I could be a harmful person in that space, is depending on how people agree to it, is that everyone has a different relative definition of what good is, if you allow it to be relative. So then people will immediately come into quite a bit of discord around an agreement like that, because I would say good is what provokes people and makes them question themselves and their reality. And other people would be like, good is something that is non-disruptive, slowly, piece by piece, putting Lego blocks to build a wall, or whatever the metaphor might be. So people can absolutely have, just by putting something like good without defining what good is. I'm like, oof. This is why I default to neutrals a lot of times, because I was just like, it's such a long conversation. Now I love having long conversations, but I've realized many people do not.
I think the intention with that agreement also is to try to curb the tendency, the defensive posture, the defensive reaction to when we do feel provoked, triggered, or harmed.
Yeah.
To attack, to say, why did you do that to me?
Yeah.
It's interesting. I believe in the responsibility of words being said here, and that carrying an energy and that affecting people, and I bear some responsibility in like that happening, because I was part of it.
Yeah.
And I also have worked pretty consistently to eliminate the language of like, you made me feel this way.
Yeah.
Because I feel like there can be stimulus, but at the end of the day, like my feeling is my feeling, and I don't believe we make each other feel things.
Yes. Yeah. Well, it's funny. I would not introduce nuance to that, but I would introduce a series of miniature binaries that we can use to evaluate, and that we would have to be like, oh, okay, well, here's almost, as you move it along inch by inch, or incrementally increase the perception of harm, and then the evidence. It's all about evidence, man. The evidence of harm. Like, is there evidence of your causing someone to feel something? Because I truly believe you could even because you could take that argument all the way over piece by piece, pixel by pixel, to me punching you in the face doesn't cause you to feel pain. because we know there are certain meditative practices that can literally disconnect, at least temporarily, you from your ability to sense pain in any relevant fashion. That to me would be too extreme. For example, you know what I mean? So if if you are literally naming someone and using words that are generally accepted, semantically defined as things that are uh, I shouldn't say, that are not the opposite of life-giving, that are trying to kill that particular individual, that are not, because you can be corrective of a person and being like, you're you keep whatever you keep what's a good example, like Eileen, you keep calling Keith an asshole. You know what I mean? Please, like, you keep doing it over and over again. You're highlighting that they might not like it. You're intentionally highlighting that person, and even using shame. To me, in the binary, that's allowable. Is that a yes, no? That's a yes. But if you kept being like, Eileen, you're an asshole. Eileen, you're an asshole. Eileen, you're an asshole. Then at some point, you're like, I think it goes beyond just like the co-creation responsibility, where you are actually aggressively engaging in language that almost can only be generally perceived as ill-intentioned, or as with the intention of harm, because we can't assume harm is ill-intentioned either. So that, like, this whole thing, like with evidence, this is a great thing. Like, if you have video of something, someone punching something, you're like, well, we can at least all agree that's harm, right? Now, whether that's acceptable harm or all that stuff, we can talk about it. Why were you punching them or whatever? But I think there are versions, as far as I can understand it, with our words that would be like, you're not making them feel attacked, or you're not making them feel bad, or making them feel defensive, but you certainly are trying to make them, quite specifically in that moment, trying to make them feel that. Does that make sense?
Come on, Eileen.
I know. Eileen. That's so funny. I literally I was just thinking about a name that, like, I have no bad feeling. I don't know anybody named Eileen who's ever done it. I know a bunch of Eileens, but they're all lovely people. So I was like, oh, I can use that name without having some sort of like fuel behind it.
Yeah. No, and you're right. I mean, even in the hopefully light roasting of learning that you don't like the word nuance. I mean, that's an example, and to me, compassion at an interpersonal level is learning what does trigger somebody, and doing my best to avoid that, because I understand that they're going to potentially react to a certain, I don't know, certain words, certain ways of being, certain actions, certain things. And I suppose compassion then scaled up to a systems level means, hey, how can we reduce the amount of harm that happens because a system was designed a certain way? Which actually, a quick loop back to something you mentioned about the narrative, like, oh, I can just unfollow and I can do all that. I think the counterpoint there is that, and yet if there are dominant narratives that are just being snowballed in those environments, that particularly for marginalized folks maybe are harming them at large, and because they're reinforcing the systems, or they're in some other way, that might not be an opportunity. There might not be the opportunity to just to cancel that access and cancel that impact.
Oh, the eventual impact. Yeah. The three, it's just always harder to demonstrate whether that's, I agree with you. It's such a longer conversation to find out what isn't the nuance. You know what I mean? In that you'd have to then, because then you have to demonstrate not only in the initial harm, which is already very, very difficult, and then, but to do the, let's say, the 2 to 3 degrees it might take to actually reach that person is. Now, again, I actually think your reasoning, I'm not in any way invalidating it. I'm just saying, oh yes, that is totally true. And it becomes monumentally difficult to figure out if that's happening or not.
The direct harm versus perhaps indirect.
3 to 4 degrees. Cause then you have to prove harm 4 times over. And at that point, I'm just saying, statistically, I was like, it's not impossible, but it's unlikely. I mean, that's like relay race levels of coordination in order to actually connect all those tissues that this is the person. It's such a game, even just in the game of whatever, as kids, we play the game of telephone to kind of like, it's a fun game, but it also, I mean, it's a great game. I don't know if kids play that game anymore because they have actual smartphones, but it's a great game, kids. The game of telephone, for people who might not know, is where you sit, I think, often in a circle or a line, and one person says hopefully a simple phrase or sentence, whispers it in the person of the ear, the person to the left or right of them, depending on which, whatever. I'm not, you can choose whichever. There's a gray area. I don't care which binary you pick of right or left. And you whisper it in their ear and they keep going the same direction, whispering in the next person's ear what they heard. And then it comes back to the person who said it in the circle. And quite often you'll note, unless a group is especially coordinated or excellent listeners, it's a great exercise to actually see how good a listener a group is. Listeners, people in the group are, and it comes back to your ear as a completely different thing.
Mm-hmm.
Very often. And that is just a fun little game that we used to play like straight up on the playground. You'd be like, oh, you want to play telephone? Okay. And you'd sit down and play telephone 2 or 3 rounds, and then the recess bell would go. It teaches you like a vital, every good game teaches you vital life lessons, but that is a vital life lesson in how information kind of flows from person to person. And so just using the game of telephone theorem, to demonstrate 3 or 4 layers of harm is like, oh gosh, who even knows? You'd be able to, and this is even we'll talk about this whenever we get into more like white supremacy stuff, is like when you get from actual white supremacy, meaning believing that white people are a race of any relevance, and that we, if I'm included amongst them, which I may or may not be, I guess it's kind of up to me, then that is an evolutionarily superior race, essentially. Much like the Nation of Islam is a black supremacist. They believe that white people were made by Yaqub, the big-headed scientist. I don't even kid you, this is for real. So they were literally a sort of a mongrel hybrid race between higher beings and lower beings, sort of like somewhere between a demon and a human. And likewise, white supremacy, which is there are practitioners of throughout U.S. history that believe that white people were superior, like innately because of some sort of, I don't know, evolutionary DNA. There's some Darwinian elements, but all sorts of things. Just say that we're literally better than people who are darker than us, and then that can play the game of telephone. And by the time later, you're like, 3 degrees later, we can be in some forms of modern white supremacy, or things that are actually white supremacy's grandchildren, no longer white supremacy, because they are, if a system advantages white people, then it is explicitly not white supremacist, because white people don't need advantages because they are supreme. So then if you build a system to advantage white people, it may be because you're 2 generations previously informed by white people are supposed to be on the top because we're the best. And then once you look around, you're like, we're not on the top anymore. We better get back there. Then, it's like, you can tentatively go, oh, I can see how that would be connected to white supremacy. But as it gets farther and farther, you're like, it's so hard to even figure what things are about anymore.
Yeah, let's unpack most of that on another show.
Yeah.
But I think the way I connect those is to say, well, demonstrably, this country was founded and its founding documents were written by folks who clearly believed in white supremacy. It was written into the Constitution that Black folks were 3/5 of a person. So
yeah,
that enshrined a certain perspective that I think we're still in some ways living under. But let's loop back. There were a couple things coming out of last week, which is why we decided to do a part 2.
Yeah.
Some of which we've touched on, but one was I was just thinking about well, why? Like, why are we so terrified of being canceled? To me, it has a lot to do with belonging. I hold belonging as like our most deeply biological need. Because whether we like to admit it or not, perhaps especially in America, we really need each other. And of course we are interdependent in many ways, and it's impossible to pretend we're not. Like I don't know how to grow all the food I eat. Most of it. And I can't remember if I mentioned it here, but Gabor Mate does a lot of trauma work, and it's such a simple and I think profound framing. It just says, look, I mean, everybody needs basically 2 things: authentic expression and belonging. And most of us have traded our authentic expression for belonging somewhere along the way. And that for a lot of people, that happens in the family unit in childhood, right?
Yes. Oh, for
Like,
sure.
oh, if I don't assimilate to this, whatever's happening in this house I showed up in, whew, that's going to be bad news. I'm not going to get access to anything I need. And
yeah. Well,
yeah,
how interesting is that? That speaks to particular parenting styles too, though. You know what I mean? Whereas then, like, if you're not acceptable, somehow you will be deprived. It's fascinating. Whereas, like, I've lived around people who both my parents are nonconformists in general. So then, like, if my parents were mad at me, I was like, my parents love me. Like, I could super piss them off. I'm still getting dinner. I could literally, you know what I mean? I could be in as much so I have no. So I know I come from that place where, like, I was constantly unmoored. So I was constantly in a state of, like, needing to recover and control my space, but I was under no concern of being abandoned ultimately. You know what I mean? And even if they stop loving me for 24 hours, then I'm like, okay. All right.
Same here. I often point to that
yeah.
as probably my greatest privilege is growing up in a household like that.
Yeah. Stable family life. We know statistically is actually one of the most profound, like, having two parents in a home who love you is one of the most profound statistical privileges that we can get. Yeah.
Yeah. And tragically, I mean, as far as we've come with, gay rights as one thing to point out, tragically, there are still a lot of families that cancel, gay or trans children in particular who are attempting to come out, and there's a lot of homeless populations and or even suicides because of that.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I didn't exactly intend to go there, but that is an extreme and a very extreme, very personal, extraordinarily heartbreaking version of cancel culture.
And it gets to the realm of it, but I think it's a great thing to highlight because it gets to the realm of just accountability within, because family units, like you said, are foundational, right? And so if any of those things, there are make or break rules in every single family unit. You know what I mean? There are absolutely families I know who I had friends who were, like, into drugs early or whatever. And the parents were like, if I catch you doing drugs again, you're out of the house. Or kids who were like, it was like, if you ever steal from me, you're sleeping on the streets for the night. You know what I mean? Or other people might be like, if you called your mother the B word or whatever, you would be struck and you might be like, you're out, like, literally you're gone, you're out of here. I've been kicked out of schools too. I have not been kicked out of my home, although I sort of left my home under some degree of duress when I was 16, but I and moved in with another family member, so it was fine. It was all good. It wasn't actually that traumatic at all, but being kicked out of school is relatively traumatic for that same thing. So I'm like, those dynamics are really interesting. But just like in your space, the work in the space you're talking about, if you violate that agreement, ultimately, like, you would be canceled from the space, you'd be removed from the space. And that's the wild thing that can happen with, like, so then some families would be like, this is the part that doesn't make any sense. If someone comes out to you and is like, I'm gay, and you're like, you have to go. I was like, that would be like, to me, I was like, worst, because I don't know if I know anybody who would do that, but I certainly know people who know people who know people would do that. So I'm far more adjacent to it than probably you would be. Although 3 degrees is pretty far anyway. Who knows? Maybe everyone is. But to me, that's like, I don't understand that. To me, that seems like outside of the binary. That's a violation of the appropriate binary. That's in the black. That's evil, not good. In that, even if you think that's wrong and that's a violation intentionally, that's a violation of intention, but there's no outcome. There's no outcome of the statement of your intention. For example, if you're like, I'm having thoughts about, let's say if someone equated it, this isn't even equal. It doesn't matter if it's equal. I have thoughts about killing you guys when you sleep. Mom and dad, I have thoughts about killing you when you're asleep. Would you immediately just be like, get out of my house and you can never be here again? I don't know. I don't know if you would, honestly. I wouldn't be shocked if some of the same families, and this is making a lot of assumptions and potential accusations of hypocrisy. I mean, this is an invented family, y'all. These people don't literally exist. This is an invention. But I would assume the family would be like, well, let's work through this. You know what I mean? You wouldn't be like, you're sleeping out. You're literally, your house, you're unhoused now. if the kid actually killed one of them or something, you know what I mean? Actually followed through on an intention. But the statement of sexual desire doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? I think many of those same households would be like, if their kid came to them and like, I'm heterosexual and I really want to have sex with my girlfriend, right? And the parents would be like, yeah, yeah, okay. If you did it, they're like, well, you can't do that, or you're out of the house. That's the rule of the house. Okay, then that's ultimately, if you've stated the rules clearly enough, that's just, and they're agreed upon essentially. Or if you have enough, we'd have to figure out like what age parents are still like in their sort of judicial role as like arbiters. If then you acted on that and had sex with your girlfriend, heterosexually had sex with your girlfriend, a lot of those same families would kick that kid right out of the house. So for me, that anyone coming out and getting kicked out of the house doesn't make a dang bit of sense. Like there has to be action. All you're stating at that point is intention. So if it has to be, to me, there has to be action in order for accountability to even be involved. You know what I mean? To me, that's like Minority Report stuff. Like, oh, then I know you're going to do something that I say you can't do. You're like, no, you don't. You literally don't. You know what I mean? So it's not life. To me, it's not life-giving, because love and life-giving activity can absolutely be rebuke, can absolutely be punishment. Like a just punishment is absolutely loving, but it has to be an appropriate and just punishment. Like if it's not, then it's literally, it's death giving, you know?
It's funny. I can't make the connection now, but something about one of our conversations reminded me of Minority Report as well. I have a feeling we may be revisiting it.
Yeah. Science fiction, man. Science fiction tells the truth.
Well, yeah, there's a lot in that premise of we're gonna punish people based on these other people claiming they know the future.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Well, it'll come up in our abortion conversation as well. Yeah. It comes up in a lot. It comes up in so many different areas. But again, so much, this is also how we perceive reality too. So I understand that it's difficult. I'm not just like, oh my gosh, a bunch of jerks. You're like, no, we're constantly playing out probabilities and likelihoods based on statistical analysis of like scientific evidence or of whatever we perceive intuitively, common sense-ish. You know what I mean? We're all trying to do something. I wouldn't say we're all trying our best, but we're all trying to do something. It's as far as I'll go.
You're not going to give in to the good intention. Who could have predicted, for instance, that there'd be another Top Gun movie? Speaking of Tom Cruise.
Oh my gosh. I after 5 years passed, I would not have. I think that the betting odds would have plummeted. So who knew? Who knew? We didn't know. And here it is.
And here we are. Well, one thing kind of came up in my reflections from last week was just admitting that I have historically not been very good at apologizing. I mean, it is, I think one of my challenges, one of my very personal challenges in this space is I don't like hurting people. I really don't. I'm this sort of peacemaker. I want to get along with everybody. And I'm not saying that to absolve myself of the harm and the impact I've had on folks at all. And I've learned a lot of very hard lessons about apologizing.
Yeah.
And hopefully I've gotten better at it. But I think that's the crux of a lot of this. It's just not wanting to admit, because I'd like to believe, because I often like to assume good intent. I believe because we are loving beings at our I think our core, which actually, that's funny. There may be a difference between us.
For sure. Yeah.
Do I have this right? You believe perhaps humanity is malevolent, reaching towards a loving God. Is that sort of accurate?
No, I mean, literally, like, I mean, I can state my own personal beliefs as separate from the sort of like Christianity 101 for anyone who's listening, just as an informative bit. But essentially, Christianity 101 is sort of built on what's called the depravity of man, which is the Bible verse of like, no one seeks after God, no, not one. And that people have probably heard this, that like humankind is essentially sinful. Now, sinful means to miss the mark, to miss the bullseye. I would suggest, my personal belief then is that there certainly are degrees of attempts to be listen according to one's conscience, like heed one's conscience and do that which is beneficial or that which is lovely even. but that our essential disposition is the opposite of good intention in many ways. That literally not only are we misfiring off of the bullseye, that quite often we're actually aimed the opposite direction. And we can occasionally, like in our waylay, send arrows back at the bullseye just because we're terrible at shooting bows and arrows. but no, essentially we have nothing in ourselves that is essentially divinely perfect. Or it's sort of like, be holy for I am holy is kind of like the big like command of God or whatever, biblically speaking. So yeah, in some ways it would be foundationally, probably foundationally opposite. However, I think the Venn diagram of what we both is, I think people actually do attempt, because of some innate made in the image of Godness, some sort of, I think conscience is kind of a gift of God that we have. We also have systems even built into our bodies that chemically reward us for munificent behavior. So I wouldn't, the like total depravity thing is actually sort of meaning totally depraved as compared to perfection, as opposed to total depravity means it does not mean we are the worst that we could possibly be. You know what I mean? And like innately, we're not constantly also like working only for like the most selfish and malevolent things, but that everything we do is syncretistically blended with selfishness against the thing you're talking about, like with belonging. You know what I mean? We might do all these wonderfully beneficial things to other people, but ultimately, if it's rooted in any fundamental way to our sense of belonging, then it is kind of based on fear and self-service, like fear of being on the outside, where it can get into cancel culture, right? Because you're like, I'm signaling, I'm part of the group. Where go get them, go get them, go get the, you know what I mean? You're changing your outfit real fast to look like everyone else and being like, yeah, get the monster. You know what I mean? Those sorts of aspects. If that kind of answers the question and tries to bring it back to what you were saying.
Yeah, beautifully so. And weaving in some of your outlook, philosophy, cosmology, as I've picked up.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think, I don't know if there's too much more to unpack there, but just admitting my own journey around apologizing. And I like
and who you are,
who I am. And for me, it's true. And I perceive in others that it is true. And I think it's one of the, we have a lot of examples of this. I mean, I think we could have a whole episode about white fragility as a concept, but this idea that folks are going to react poorly when they've been called out, when somebody else says I've been harmed. So one version of white fragility might show up like, oh, I'm never going to admit I did harm, racial harm. And I think the depth there is that I didn't want to harm you. I think that's what's underneath it. And then tragically, by not meeting that person and by not apologizing, we're at least not healing the harm, maybe even causing more harm.
Yeah. I used to hate that too. Whatever. I think we're all, hopefully, anyone who's being intentional about their existence is on the same, can relate to your trajectory, and maybe somewhere sort of farther along the journey or way behind you in the journey. But like, I think that's an excellent trajectory to be exploring. And I think it is fundamental to this. Again, the thing you're talking about too is not only like what part of the group, like, do I belong in this group of people who are like this, which is kind of related to identity. And then in myself, the way I self-identify, like, am I, and I think cancel culture is part of this, where people are sometimes fueled by something they're actually offended by. And then often, I think the reason it rises up and becomes like problematic and harmful and not life-giving, like the quote at the beginning was talking about, is people get caught up in, oh, wait, I think I want to be the kind of person who is mad about a thing like this. You know what I mean? So in some ways, it's like it's a vision board. They're like, vision board. I get mad when people say these things or use this word or say these jokes or whatever. Talk. Some people even talk about certain subjects, like, or say, obviously in our culture, say certain words. There's literally, I mean, there's one really dominant word that like you just can't say unless you have to be. And even then, people don't always agree on like which groups can say it, and can Puerto Ricans say it, or can they not say it, or when 6ix9ine says it, because that's what he's always said. You're like, oh well, it's part of his culture, yeah, but we don't. I thought we were just saying that like only Black people can say it, and you know what I mean? We're in a world of conundrum, and plenty of people just respond being like, I think this is how my group responds, and then some people do. I think more fundamentally, what you're talking about is, in some ways, this is beautiful. I want to be a kind of person who is so sensitive as to recognize when harm has been done, and when recognize when I have caused the harm. And I'm a super curious, for me, just to contrast with you, I'm a super curious person when it comes to things I need to apologize for, which can be exhausting. I think it's syncretistic. It's a blend of truly wanting to know what the actual thing is so I can know exactly what to apologize for. It is syncretistic, if I'm honest. It is syncretistically blended with a desire to delay the apology in analysis. Because I think I've absolutely regretted how long it took me to apologize for things. I've absolutely regretted in my life apologizing for things I shouldn't have apologized for. Both are monumentally harmful. We see this with cancel culture all the time. And this is, to me, this is a tenet I hold to be completely factual. It is as harmful as the sort of rising of, let's say, an unjust accountability. Because I truly believe there can be examples of both. Again, I haven't answered the question yet, but let's say it's an unjust accountability example, of which there certainly are some. When the person who has been unjustly called to task apologizes, it is as harmful as the mob trying to cancel them. Like, it is, because all it does is validate that experience, and it validates that behavior. You know what I mean? It's kind of like with children. My sister is, what's the word? Neurodivergent. She's on the spectrum. And I was reading the other day, because she like attacks people sometimes. She's nonverbal. And so she gets upset. And when she's upset, she realizes her most capable weapon are her claws and her fists and her biting or whatever. So, which is awful. It's literal harm, it leaves literal wounds and bleeding on people. But it's also somewhat understandable. But I was reading about how to deal with it, because my whole thing is like, oh, you got to stop it and clamp it down and hold her tight and let her know she's okay and you love her and that sort of stuff. And that's an option. But I've been reading too that some of the best options are to be non-reactive, which is not at all my instinct, my intuition, but to literally be like, but I think you have to do it early. But like when people attack you and like, they're just pretty much just trying to get a reaction. They're just like, I feel out of control. I want to feel control on you. I'm hurting you, so I feel more in control of the world, which is part of cancel culture. How we all lash out when we feel attacked. We're like, no, I attack you. You know what I mean? You don't off balance me. I off balance you. But to be non-reactive. So as they're doing this, you're just like, you keep chopping your onions or whatever you're doing. And that will not stimulate or reinforce the behavior, Pavlovian response. Whereas if a crowd rises up and you apologize, then not only are they all riled up, but they're like, yes, see, we were right. So the next time they do it, they're going to do it twice as hard, Even though apologies, like I know, are in some circumstances the absolute right thing to do, and is what accountability is about. I'm holding you accountable, and then you apologize. And then if you apologize, I get to forgive you. You get to be forgiven. And then we've actually started to heal out of this experience. We've all seen examples of in cancel culture, that's cancel culture, quote unquote. That's not really how it works. A lot of times people apologize and then they're like, good, now get out. And you're like, okay, well then you weren't holding anyone accountable. You were literally just trying to punish. That's not helpful. That's literally like spanking your kid and then being like, why did you spank me? And you're like, get out of here. I mean, what? That doesn't make any sense. You know what I mean? So, but the apology, no, it's just such a good point, because it is it's the path to further destruction improperly done. And if done right, it is the crux. It is the absolute necessary element to heal out of this process communally. Just when you've done wrong, say you're sorry. It's the best.
And going back to that what I was saying about compassion, right? It's like, even if it's hard, even if I don't want to admit that I did it, even if it doesn't make any rational sense whatsoever,
Yeah,
that me existing here and doing or saying something led to this thing over here, that ultimate act of compassion to say, one thing I've learned about apology is just start with some version of like, I see you, I hear you.
Yeah.
But it's got to be true and genuine. I mentioned that case last week where essentially it was I was asked to sort of be forced to apologize. Strongly encouraged.
Yes, there you go.
And it was a mess. And I don't think anybody left that room, feeling healed. And
No.
I'm not going to take all the responsibility for that just because my nervous system was totally frayed and destroyed in that moment. And
Yeah. Well, and if you're not,
maybe we all were, you know.
yeah. Well, and if you're not convinced, you can't apologize. You know what I mean? I think again, this happens more in like celebrity culture, but I was
Right.
like, you get the sense that like someone drafted their apology for them, or that when they do apologize, it's not real. Actually, this was on the morning show on Apple TV. It was in the second season.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Someone went on the air and started apologizing, and then was like, "But I don't know. I mean, I don't want to." And they're like, "Well, you've got to." And of course, me in my seat watching that, I was like, "What is wrong with you?" No, he doesn't. Like, he literally doesn't. If he has not done wrong, he literally must not apologize. You literally can't give that to someone because it's not part of the process. You know what I mean? They're literally trying to make a case out of something. Again, if there's no evidence, it's like, well, some groups are real mad about it. Why are they mad? Are they right to be mad? You have to adjudicate that. So we can't, a false apology or even a forced apology, which would eventually be real, is still not going to be helpful because that's not what an apology is. Apology is partially the ceremony of offering words, and acknowledgement, I think, is a beautiful in between. And this is the thing. Sometimes people connect them. And I think this is the danger. Maybe this will help people. And maybe this will help me if I say this out loud. The connecting of acknowledging, feeling, and apology. There needs to be a period at the very least between those things. Because I've found that let's say this is the only truth that you're able to perceive. I'm sorry you feel that way. Nobody likes that. But the sad thing is that's as true as anything. So to me, if you're going to acknowledge someone's feeling, acknowledge it till the cows come home. Let them know they're seen. Let them know that you understand what they're feeling. But if they're wrong to feel it, you can't say you're sorry, because it's literally, you can't apologize for, if you haven't violated anything, then you actually have nothing to apologize for. You know what I mean? This is the same. You can't make people feel some way. There are times when you are responsible or definitely a dominant co-creator of creating someone's response. You know what I mean? And there are other times when you're simply not. And this is the thing when people on Twitter like demand public apology as an individual basis, right? Like, whatever, Shifty Shell Shock 1717 demands an apology from Elon Musk for, weaponizing the Twitter mob to go attack the head legal counsel. Hey, Shifty Shell Shock 1717, you're not involved. Like, Elon Musk doesn't owe you an apology. You're literally not involved in that process. If the harm has come to this lawyer and he agrees that in any way he was responsible for the people who harmed her, then he can go apologize. But like whatever, Dave Chappelle doesn't owe me an apology if he's offended me. Unless he's literally talked about me, you know what I mean? Like me, if he's like, Brendan, you're an asshole. I'd be so excited because that's he's a pretty famous person mentioning me in his stand-up thing. So I'd probably get a Wikipedia entry out of it at least. But let's say that offended me. It's just like I still can't necessarily, you have to demonstrate harm. And connecting the two can be really, really, really dangerous. But I love that you brought up acknowledging people's feelings, because that's the place where I think they get confused, and then people get real mad because you're like, that's not an apology. And you have to be like, oh, you're right, that isn't. Whereas you're like, what do you mean? I apologize for, and you're like, oh no, you start a whole new fight. Whereas just to be like, I often say I'm sorrowed that you feel that way. Like I feel the pain with you. I feel sadness at your sadness, and I feel sadness at your anxiety. I'm not sorry. I'm not apologizing because I haven't done anything wrong. You know what I mean? That's like confessing. Oh, literally, it's confessing to a crime you didn't commit. In which case, that's harmful.
I mean, that's powerful. I even like the languaging there. Like, I'm sorrowful.
Yeah, I feel.
Yeah, and some of the, particularly, I just learned a conflict transformation practice from the authentic relating community, and that's, in essence, that's what it's about. Like, can we get past the battle zone of not actually wanting to face what's deeper? And often it is a sadness. Often it is a sadness that I'm here, that you're feeling this way, that I was involved. It's as you were talking, I was like, oh, an example of a bad apology might be like, well, I'm sorry that you chose to invite me into your space and didn't fully consider the implications of what might transpire in the future because of who I am.
Yes. I mean, that is an exaggerated version for comedy effect, and it is funny. But like, no, that absolutely. I'm sure. I am almost positive I've done a mediocre version of that at some point in my life, where like, I'm sorry, and it kind of turns into, I'm sorry that you're like this around me. You know what I mean, kind of a thing. And oh boy, I don't. Those are the kind of things I've regretted. I've regretted saying that way. That's not even if it's partially true. You know what I mean? Like, and that. But the thing is, you're not sorry. Like, sorry is not sorrow. Do you know what I mean? That like, so that's why I like sorry, because it sounds like sorry, and it's really like maybe I can slide. Don't feel
I'm
like
sorrowed.
Yeah.
I think I got a sorry good enough. As good as it's gonna get. I'm out.
Yeah, but you can feel that for someone too. That like, oh man, I see that you probably have repeatedly chose people like me. So I'm sorrowed for you that you keep picking people like me. You enjoy and because people enjoy it, and literally like it literally gives them the chemical responses of joy to be victimized. I know I have aspects of that in myself. Absolutely, I've seen it in other people. It's real. I like. I'm okay. Like again, I like being punched in the face. It's like, as especially if we're somewhat agreed upon being punching each other in the face. It's like, I'm not opposed to the feeling, and kind of like it. I like being punched in the face and be like, I used to do it as a kid. Be like, you can slap me as hard as you can, and I'm gonna see how many times that you slap me until I actually want to respond. You know what I mean? So like some of us have that instinct. So you can be sorrowed for someone's consistent bad choices, but then it's very important, I think, to stick the mirror on up and be like, I'm a bad choice. I need to recognize, and that's the thing about apologizing is, and Archie says this all the time to our kids, fundamentally, even if it doesn't work this way practically, when you apologize to your sister, that means implicit in there is, I'm not going to do this again. Now you're a frail human being, so you probably will, but it has to even go beyond, and I'll try not to do it again. No, your aim shouldn't be low. You know what I mean? Aim for perfection, hit slightly outside of perfection. I'm not going to do this again. When you start talking and I interrupt you, trying to compete with you, is something our kids do, that like someone shares good news and they're like, oh yeah, well, you know what I mean? Interrupting. So then you basically said her voice wasn't important and you're trying to like push her down, and you're trying to like compete with her in her moment to just like enjoy her victory. So then you're missing out too. This is like fundamental, like rupture of humanity. Then you're not going to do that again, is what I'm sorry means. It doesn't just mean, oh, I acknowledge you're hurt. It means I've made an error. I'm acknowledging my error. Therefore, my intention in the space is to learn my errors constantly and reduce them. Or as my prayer has often been, Lord, help me make new mistakes.
Yeah, I love that. I just came across an apology framework on Instagram, which is the best place to learn these things.
Hey,
and it was sort of like
good stuff.
It was like acknowledge harm, and then it's funny. I'm like, what was the middle part? But anyway, it landed on that. Like, how will I do this differently in the future?
Yeah. It's the past, present, future model. Makes sense, right? This happened back then. Now we're talking about it. Here's where I am now, and how I'm responding and taking responsibility for what I do, and not taking responsibility for anything I don't. And then in the future, I will endeavor to respond this way, or even initiate this way, or whatever. I think it's good. It's so good. And there need to be classes. I mean, I know you're literally in classes for this, but like there need to be classes for this. Like we need to learn the system of demanding accountability, recognizing when accountability is appropriate or inappropriate, then responding in appropriate fashion. So we all can learn what I know this is very super Christian 101 again, but like repentance and forgiveness is like the fundamental repair of the rupture with relationship with God. And I think it's the same thing for human beings. Repent means to like change your mind or kind of turn 180 degrees from where you are. So if you're running away from accountability, you turn around, you flip and face it. And then if you've done the wrong, if it's presented to you, you start by apologizing. And God in Christianity through Christ sort of taking the punishment already, but like God then acknowledges your apology and then meets you with forgiveness. Like despite the fact that he's divine, he's perfect, he's made no errors. So even someone who's error free, which we as human beings are never, right? There's pretty much almost always. Yeah. I mean, besides you, Andy, everyone else on the planet, I mean, unless we're in a situation where like someone's walking down the street and we've seen this or whatever with like Asian hate incidents or whatever, some little Korean lady walks by some dude and then he turns around and punches her in the back of the head or whatever, then yes, she was not in any way co-creating that scenario. But I think in most typical apology scenarios, we're all somewhat complicit, involved in it somehow. But that once you offer the apology, like there is the crux, there's the moment. What a great time to offer mercy, as we would want to have mercy because we know we're going to mess up too, and it creates this beautiful feedback loop of like real accountability and forgiveness. And man, we need it. I mean, we've talked about this in a bunch of different issues, but like how imperative for all these violations, ethical violations, on a societal scale or individual, how much we need to apologize and how much we need forgiveness. So we all need it, man.
Yeah.
Constant. More than we'd like to admit, I think too, like you're talking about, like I certainly am confessing to.
Well, and I actually was compelled to look this up. The holistic psychologist is the reference here on Instagram.
Yeah.
And this is actually hilarious. So yeah, one was acknowledge the other person's feelings.
Yeah.
Two, not shocking that I erased this from memory, take responsibility.
Yeah.
And then three, acknowledge what will be different in the future. So
yeah.
I think that's
I love it. Yeah.
Groovy little framework. And there are systems versions of this, right? Like reparation is like a systems version of, this whole system or group of folks, harmed in some way this group, and how can we actually account for that and in some ways atone for that.
Well, that's the penalty. That's the penalty sort of part. Yeah.
And a lot of folks I talk to, especially Black friends, are like, the money is kind of the least of it. I mean, yes, like generational wealth, obviously, well, I would say obviously, I think statistically a very real challenge over the hundreds of years of America's growth and development. And yet the deeper part there is like, let's not just throw money at this thing, but let's face it in the way that we attempt to do in this show. Let's face these realities that are complex, and let's face who has been harmed and how, and look at the systems and what needs to be changed. And how can we change it?
Yeah. Well, that's a great example. I mean, we'll talk about that in a future show too. And that like the world of reparations is a great thing in terms of like, as an example of that restitution legally. This is the biblical law. This is like US law. This is like interpersonal intuitive law, that restitution must be made for the average individual in a regular everyday apology. It's typically the restitution of the continued good behavior. You have to like, quote unquote, earn someone's trust back, that sort of thing. But the restitution after apology, not preceding apology, never. This is the problem with, you were talking about before we started recording, of like getting money from the government to like help subsidize, when they shut you down. And I was like, if you do that, but you don't apologize, what they've done is monstrously damaging. You know what I mean? They didn't say, hey, sorry, we're shutting your life down. Here's some money. That's how it should go. Just like if your dad like lost his temper and screamed at you and then just took you out for an ice cream. And then you write in your little semi-autobiographical memoir, and I knew that ice cream sundae was his apology. No, you don't. That's him literally buying it up. That's making restitution without apology. You know what I mean? So reparations are then like would have to come post an apology. Now, in some ways, but then reparations are so difficult, which is why we should have a whole episode on reparations, because the person who has done the harm, who initiated the harm, ultimately, like they're all dead. The original initiators of harm. So then there's nobody to say. So it's purely ceremonial. Now, I think ceremonial apologies can be healing. I think all sorts of ceremonial conduct can be healing. But I understand why we grapple with it as a society, because we're like, I mean, all you can do, I mean, again, it's almost like finding out if someone stole, this is like a way small microcosm, but someone recently bought a bust on eBay for like $25. I think it's like a New York Times story today. And it turned out to be like a semi-priceless artifact, like a museum artifact. And then they're trying to return it now to Belgium or whoever like previously owned it or whatever, before it was stolen, by Nazis from museum. I'm making up half of the story. The first half is true. But like, you're like, oh, who do I give this back to? Like, this was stolen generations ago. It doesn't belong to anyone. It doesn't, well, it's like, oh, we found the family who owned it back then. It doesn't necessarily belong to them either. It wasn't theirs. You know what I mean? Unless that person literally even left it. Do you even have a legal trail? Did you leave it to someone in their will? You know what I mean? Do you automatically inherit your parents' everything? No. You know what I mean? You don't. Like, I don't. We certainly inherit all sorts of genetic dispositions or whatever, but like it becomes such a quagmire when you're like, great egregious wrong has been done. There are elements that are still percolating now from that egregious wrong, and yet we're not going to heal, really. It's not like there's no amount of money, it will heal. Do you still do it anyway, as to say sorry and do a right thing? There's a great case. I had an excellent argument for that, but it's not going to heal anything, really, because no one can apologize. Like the people who could apologize already did apologize and die. I have no idea who apologized and who didn't. It wasn't recorded. But massively, there was no apology. And then those people died. And then the people who they harmed died. And now we're all living in just like the just maelstrom of misery elsewise. So I say all this out loud, not just to be like, what a miserable world we're in. But since the thing you're talking about, and this is kind of the whole thing of having these conversations, these like hot takes served cold, is right now, we have all these opportunities to invite apology, to ask for apology, to seek apology, to remedy these things while we're still alive. Let's remedy these dishes as often as possible while they're still warm. We don't want to wait. None of us are promised tomorrow. You know what I mean? And so like now. It's the only Daniel Day-Lewis impression I do from Lincoln. But like now is the time. Now's the time to apologize and to actually engage in that, because we've already seen what happens when you don't do that.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately, sadly, easy for me to get shut down by some of that complexity. I think I mentioned this before, but the only time I bought and sold property was in Chicago years ago. And
Yeah.
when I was selling, I was like, I was starting to kind of get a sense of land acknowledgements. I think maybe it was in that first episode where we talked a lot about.
Oh yeah.
And I was like, what if a percentage of each real estate transaction somehow went back to support the First Nations? And in this area is particularly complex in terms of how many First Nations were here and all of that. And in a lot of areas, it might have been like, okay, great, I'll just make this donation to this. And again, not magically going to solve anything. And in fact, probably not that useful if I don't actually engage directly and learn, more than just some anonymous donation or something. But like, what can I learn about it? Who can I know? How can we salvage some of the culture and whatnot? But I didn't even do that because it was too complex. There wasn't an easy button. And there are places I think in Oakland and there are some areas where there actually are groups starting to do this to make it easier for folks. So I'm grateful for that.
Yeah.
Well, I know we got to come in for landing. There were two things we can maybe tease out for the future. There was the time I got canceled by posting a Jordan Peterson video on Facebook. And then there's maybe an ongoing conversation around the decision to cancel Aunt Jemima.
Oh, yes. So for anybody who wants to come engage with us on social media, wherever you find yourself, if those topics provoke anything, or if you're provoked by anything we've talked about today, both in the like, yes, thank you, and also the what in the world are you talking about? Those are both perfectly acceptable responses. We welcome and we acknowledge your responses to whatever we've said. Those we're going to just assume those are real feelings.
And please don't cancel us, or do. That's your choice.
Or do. Yeah, this is what we've got, and we've given it to you. Thank you, Andy. I love you.
Love you too. Bye.
Bye.